Hey, what's up, everybody? What's up, family? Welcome back to the Victory U podcast, where we think critically, live faithfully, and impact culture. Today's episode is one that you need in your spirit because we're talking about the tenor of toxic relationships. Not just what people say, but the tone, the temperature, the emotional frequency that they bring to your life. Because some folk do not have to yell to drain you. They don't have to yell to drain you. Some do it with a whisper. So lean in. We're getting ready to go.
With faith, reason, and culture collide. Dr. David on the mic, bringing truth with a vibe. Healing in the beat, wisdom in the glow. At the crossroads where your mind breaks through.
This is Victory U.
Tune in, level up, let your spirit renew.
Welcome to the Victory U podcast, where the culture meets truth.
Let's go.
Again, glad to have you all with us on for the Victory U podcast. Tonight, we're talking about the tenor of toxic relationships. Listen, when we talk about tenor, we're talking about the tone of a relationship, the emotional pitch, the vibe. That's what we're talking about, because you can say the right words with the wrong tone and still create damage. So, I'm talking about stuff like, I'm not mad, but, the person's cold and dismissive. Or when a person says, I was just joking, but they're being very belittling. Or when they say, I'm fine, but in actuality, what they're doing is being manipulative. Because believe it or not, tone reveals truth, even when the words are trying to hide it. I need somebody to catch that right there. Tone reveals truth, even when words are trying to hide it. That's powerful right there. It's powerful right there. To hide it. Listen, I want to talk about the tenor of toxic spaces. I want to talk about signs that the tenor is toxic, because the devil doesn't always announce himself with volume. Sometimes he shows up in patterns. So there are 4 things that I'm going to give you tonight. I want you to pay attention to. You could even write them down, because I want you to pay attention to these things in your life. I'm going to talk to you about the tenor of tension, the tenor of inconsistency, the tenor of control, and the tenor of guilt. The tenor of tension, the tenor of inconsistency, the tenor of control, and the tenor of guilt. So when we talk about that tenor of tension, what we're talking about is, that it's that low level anxiety. And if you know what I'm talking about, it's that low level anxiety, and you feel it every single time you walk into a room. And here it is. Your spirit tightens not because of what a person says, but because of what you know is coming. The tenor of tension, right? You feel it as soon as you walk into a room. You can feel that shift in the atmosphere. And sometimes when this happens, you can struggle with knowing and trying to figure out, is it me? Am I imagining this? But watch this. Oftentimes, the tenor of tension is based on the tenor of inconsistency. And what do I mean by that? When you walk into the room and you don't know what version of the person you're going to get when you walk into that room, that automatically causes you to be tense. Because one day they're loving and the next day they're distant. Then one day they're charming and the next day they're cold. And then one day they're kind and then the next day they're mean. And so you kind of exist in a state of flux where you're always walking on eggshells. And it's difficult to exist in relationships with individuals when you don't know which version of them you're going to interact with. Because the truth of the reality is, when you're in this situation, you're not in a relationship. You're in an emotional roller coaster, but there's no seatbelt. There's no safety bar. And you're constantly feeling as if you're going to fall out at any time. Listen, the tenor of tension, the tenor of inconsistency. Watch this. But then you have the tenor of control. Because with the tenor of control, everything this individual uses is a method of manipulation. Everything is weaponized. See, you got to be careful about people who become master manipulators, because they know what to do to get you to do what they want you to do. And so they'll weaponize silence, weaponize disappointment, weaponize tone. Why? Because if I can weaponize these elements in your life, then I keep you in an unsteady pattern. You're never able to truly come to a place of equilibrium. And so watch this. When you are walking around and you're in the space of tension, inconsistency, and control, it causes you to always have what is called the tenor of guilt. Because everything they do becomes your fault. Right? So if you have boundaries, you become the bad person. And this is where some of you will end up finding yourselves always trying to justify your decisions to meet their expectations. Can I ask you a question? Why are you always justifying your decisions to meet somebody else's expectations? Right? And you feel guilty when you take care of yourself. And you feel guilty when you take time to rest. And you feel guilty when you take a moment to recalibrate. Because here's the reality. Tone, right? When we talk about tone, we're talking about the tone that creates this atmosphere. The tone that shapes our emotions. And this tone, it has a spiritual component to it. It has a cultural component to it. And see, this is where if we don't become educated and knowledgeable, right? People who can manipulate you can say things in a way that prohibits you from being able to address what they said because of how they said it. I hope that makes sense. Because here's the reality. This is it. I need you to lean in close. Watch this. In the church world, you can have correct doctrine and still have a demonic tone. Right? You can tell the truth, but it not be in love. So understand this. Tone plants seed. And that seed can be peace or it can be pressure. It can be connection or it can be confusion. It can be honor or it can be hostility. But if we allow our lives, what's up, Amaya? If we allow our lives to be dictated by the tone that other people set, right? We will always find ourselves dancing to the beat of somebody else's drum. And how many of you are feeling unfulfilled in your life because you're dancing to make somebody else happy while you're drowning? Can you imagine? You're dancing to make somebody else happy while you are drowning. So what we need to do, we don't want to just focus on the negative. I want to talk to you about the tenor of healthy relationships. Because the tenor of toxic spaces deals with tension, inconsistency, control, and guilt. There's tenor of healthy relationships that deal with safety, clarity, accountability, and honor. Right? So the tenor of safety, watch this. You can breathe. Right? You can just take a deep breath. And you can be honest. And here it is. Watch this. You're not being punished for being you. How many of you have existed in spaces where you felt like you were punished for being you? Where in the spaces you felt you were always made to exist in a place of perpetual guilt because you were never good enough. Here's the issue with many of us, and even people of faith. We work on jobs where we're never good enough. Sometimes we go to churches where we're taught that we're never good enough. And then we are in relationships that make us feel that we're never good enough. And then we came up in families in which we were indoctrinated with the feelings that we're never good enough. And you wonder why you exist in a place of always feeling unworthy and unloved and uncared for. And that's because you never had the tenor of safety. Because in the tenor of safety, you can be you and still be loved. See, this is why this is the powerful part of the text where we're encouraged with the fact that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Why? Because we're safe with him. And how many of you are existing and living in the place where you're no longer looking for money, you're no longer looking for the cars and the houses, you're no longer, some of you right now are saying, listen, hey, I just want to be safe. You're not looking for all of the stuff. I just want to be safe. I want to be somewhere where I can breathe. I can be me. The tenor of safety comes along with the tenor of clarity. Because with the tenor of clarity, you're not having to decode mixed signals. You're not guessing. You're not reading between the lines. You're in a place where you can be safe without the fear of, what if they said this, but they meant that? See, this is the beautiful thing about being truly in faith, right? And when I say in faith, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about relationship. I'm talking about being in a faith where you do not have to pretend. You don't have to act. But you can be who God called you to be. And not have the fear of, what if they're saying this, but in reality mean that? And that brings us to the tenor of accountability, because watch this, healthy people own their tone. Because instead of shifting the blame, it becomes, you know what? Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me fix that. Let me address what is broken. Can I help somebody out real quick? I'm all for apologies. I think apologies are great. But we need to move from a place of just saying, I'm sorry, to saying, how can I repair the damage? How can I address this? How can I fix this? And when I say fix this, I'm not saying a superficial Band-Aid. I'm saying, what can I do? How can I work to repair the harm that was done? That's what real accountability looks like. Because when you have real accountability, you're going to exist in the space of the tenor of honor. And the tenor of honor is one, watch this, that builds, not breaks, and that heals, not humiliates. The tenor of honor means that, listen, even if we have miscommunication, I'm not out to embarrass you, to humiliate you, to tear you down. No. Let's see how we can build this back. So we talked about the tenor of toxic spaces, and we talked about the tenor of healthy relationships. Before we go tonight, I want to talk to you about how to shift it. If you're in a toxic environment tonally, how do you fix it? How do you shift it? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to name it. You're going to name it. What am I naming? You're going to name the tone, because if you don't, you will normalize what is toxic. See, one of the things that happened, particularly in a lot of religious spaces, and how people got caught up in a lot of cult environments, not just in relationships, but in churches, is because people were taught to be afraid to name what they saw. But if a person is being manipulative with the microphone, just because they have the microphone, doesn't mean that they have good motives. And there was an underlying assumption that because this person was preaching and teaching, that what they were saying was inherently good. And some of us existed and normalized what we were afraid to name. It's tight. I know it's hard. But some of you have to be called back to a healthy place of being able to name what you see, so you don't normalize toxic spaces. So you don't normalize toxic behaviors. So you don't normalize toxic patterns. The second thing you have to do after you name it, so you don't normalize it, is you have to set boundaries. Listen, you have the right, I want everybody to hear me. You have the right to say, yes, we can talk, but not like this. You have a right to say, your tone is toxic, and I'm willing to talk to you, but not at this tone. That's setting boundaries. I seen somebody the other day, they wanted to have a conversation, and, I was in the vicinity, and I heard the person just start to yell and cuss and say, "You're going to do this," and da-da-da-da. And the person that was there, they just hung up the phone and said, "I'm not talking to anyone like that." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. You have the right to say, you know what? Yeah, I'm not talking. I'm not talking to you in this space." So watch this. You can create boundaries. You can set boundaries, and you can also create distance. Because sometimes creating distance is not about pettiness. It's about protection. What am I protecting? Sometimes I'm protecting my peace. I'm protecting my value. I'm protecting my self-worth. I'm protecting everything in my life that holds me together. Because sometimes wisdom, hear this, sometimes wisdom looks like walking away. Sometimes wisdom is recognizing, you know what? I've given everything that I can to this, and I can't give anymore. Some of you need to ask yourself the question, How much time have you invested in toxic spaces? How much emotional capital have you invested in toxic relationships? This is hard conversations, people, because sometimes when we've invested time and invested emotion and invested intellect and invested strength, sometimes there is an inclination to keep investing and keep pouring into something in the hopes that eventually we will get a return on our investment. And here it is, the longer we stay, the longer we invest, the more we pour in, the harder it becomes to pull out. Because you keep saying, well, I've invested 2 years, I've invested 3 years, I've invested 5 years, I've invested 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. And before you know, you know it, your life has faded away because you continue to invest in toxic spaces, because you didn't want them to think you were being petty. You didn't want them to think that you were angry and you were retaliating. Some of us, when we talk about a gambling mentality, right? One of the things that becomes very dangerous for people that gamble is that, after they've experienced a certain amount of loss, there's this inclination to keep gambling in an attempt to win back everything that they've lost. So what happens is they end up, sometimes these people will end up just mortgaging everything away. And the only way they walk away is when there's nothing left. Right? Because something inside of them keeps saying, I can get it back, I can get it back, I can get it back, I can win back. It's kind of easy to recognize it when it comes down to a gambling addiction. But what if we take that same mentality and put it into our relationships? What happens when you're in a space, a relationship, a church, right? Even a job, where you're wasting away everything you are, pouring in on the hopes that it's going to become something that it never showed you. Oh, Jesus. On the hopes that it's going to become something that it never showed you. You can't invest in a cat hoping that one day it will become a lion. And sometimes we'll get upset at the other person because we refuse to recognize that we weren't addicted to people. We were addicted to a pattern. And so we end up in the same situations. We end up in the same type of churches. We end up in the same type of jobs and friendships because we're addicted to a pattern. And so we have to recognize that sometimes, and you to lean in close, our issue isn't toxic people. Our issue is really toxic patterns. So the title of this topic was the tone of toxic relationships. When you think about tone, I want you to think about it in a musical sense, because in the musical sense, it's a pattern. And some of us are drawn to the sound of toxicity. And watch this. Our healing can only come when we learn how to retune our tone. Our healing can only come when we learn how to retune our tone. Because we keep getting ourselves, why am I constantly in debt? Right? Your indebtedness is because you're addicted to a toxic pattern. What is the pattern? When I see something I want, I impulsively go out to get it, no matter how much it costs. And that impulse becomes a part of how I pursue things and how I pursue people, because I get them based on impulse before I get to know them. And then I find myself in the same pattern. How many of us are addicted to toxic patterns? So we keep going to the same places that addresses how I feel, but never speaks to how I think. Because if I'm in a place that only addresses how I feel, but doesn't speak to how I think, my feeling changes, but my thought process remains the same. And so I'm chasing deliverance because deliverance speaks to how I feel, when God is trying to get me to walk in discipline, because discipline works on how I think. And so you have many people right now who are chasing deliverance ministries. And I've been on YouTube and TikTok long enough to see people running into the live streams and running to the chats where somebody's getting ready to prophesy your deliverance. You're not getting that on this channel. I'm not here to cast out every demon out of you through TikTok. Because some of us want to show up so somebody can tell us that I'm going to pray the demon off of you and tomorrow you're going to wake up and everything's going to be all right. But on this channel, what I'm telling you is you have to retune your tone. Because your issue isn't toxic people. It's toxic patterns. And toxic patterns will have you chasing devils instead of changing you. Toxic patterns will have you chasing devils instead of changing you. But people will run. They will run to the places that tell them what they want to hear. You will run to the places that tell you it was your haters. You will run to the places that will tell you it was everybody that was against you. Instead of the one that tells you how to change you. Because when you retune your tone, watch this, you won't let the toxicity around you change your tenor. You'll stay grounded. You'll stay calm. You'll stay rooted even in the midst of chaos. So what I'm here to do, what I'm here to say to somebody tonight, is that everything that you've experienced in your life that you call drama is actually data. Because patterns give you data. So I want you to take the patterns that you have been addicted to, and I want you to reassess them. The people who were a part of those patterns, I want you to reassess them, and I want you to consider what place you were, what state you were in. When I say state, I'm not talking about state within the country. I'm talking about your state of being, your emotional state of being, your mental state of being, your physical state of being. And I want you to start putting your data together. Because when you start putting your data together, you'll start understanding how to avoid relationships that drain you. How to avoid relationships that confuse you. How to avoid people that manipulate you. How to avoid spaces that dim the light that is inside of you. See, I used to think it was people. That's how I used to think. I used to think it was just a person. And then I say, no, it's not a person. It's patterns. Because watch this, God didn't call you to live in an emotional place of static, just noise. He called you to clarity. He called you to peace, and he called you to real connections. So very quickly, let me recap real quick. We talked about the tenor of toxic spaces, which dealt with the tenor of tension, the tenor of inconsistency, the tenor of control, and the tenor of guilt. Then we talked about the tenor of healthy relationships, which dealt with the tenor of safety, the tenor of clarity, the tenor of accountability, and the tenor of honor. And then we talked about how we shift the tenor in our lives. And that we talked about, we have to name it. We have to set boundaries. We have to create distance. And then you need to retune your tone. Listen, if you don't take anything else away, take this one. I'm going to name it. I don't care if they try to call it something else. I'm going to name it. Sometimes they will try to name manipulation as inspiration. No. That's not the same. You have to name it. No, you're trying to manipulate me. And if I see you and I know you're trying to manipulate me, I'm going to set boundaries. And if you don't respect those boundaries, I'm creating distance. And then I'm going to retune my tone. Why? Because I don't want to let the toxic spaces or toxic people or toxic patterns change who I am. I'm going to stay grounded. I'm going to stay calm. And I'm going to stay rooted. And as I recognize the patterns that have tried to destroy me, I'm going to walk in the power to change those patterns. Family, thank you for being with us on the Victory U podcast, where we think critically, we live faithfully, and we impact culture. I'm going to catch you on the next one. This is Dr. David signing out.
Thank you for listening to the Victory U podcast. Join us every Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. on YouTube and TikTok Live. Each episode drops the next day on all major podcast platforms, so you never miss a moment. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment in the chat. We would love to hear from you.